Please do it. There. That's all I wanted to mention. Okay, Islam. Yes. Stop. Okay. Talk about this dude. All right. Where am I here? Okay, so I was talking about Muhammad, and he was from the city of Mecca that I showed you in modern day Saudi Arabia. It's a major, big city, big, for that period of time, because there were major trading routes that went by it and through it. And so people would stop off in Mecca. As I was talking to you about, this. God, I did have a picture right here called the Kaaba, which I'll define for you. Oh, actually, it's right there. And it's right there. You have to write that. Your PowerPoint up. Anyways, which is a shrine in the great mosque of Mecca, which is the focus of Muslims' prayer and pilgrimage. Okay? So typically, people will say that Muslims pray towards Mecca, the city, but that's really not true. They're praying towards the Kaaba, which is in the mosque, which is in the city of Mecca. All right? So difference. They're praying to this building. Okay, this black building. Who knows what's in there because no one's allowed in. But anyways, this apparently does come from the time of Muhammad, the Kaaba. This was there before Muhammad's time. And it was the shrine where the traders and the locals would place their gods, images of their gods, statues, and all sorts of stuff. Where they could come to worship whatever gods they worshipped. According to someone, I got this somewhere, the Kaaba was said to have contained almost 400 idols and shrines to various gods. I've never seen the Kaaba because, I'm not a Muslim, so I'm not allowed to enter Mecca. No Muslim, non-Muslim is. But that big to me. Maybe if there were small idols, 400 is a lot. But anyways, nevertheless, something like 400 idols, but never a lot of idols in the Kaaba. So there were a belief in many gods. However, we do know from archaeological evidence of the Arabian Peninsula that there did seem to be a belief in a supreme god who is also called the God or Allah. So there was a high god over all the other gods, kind of intermediaries. And you see this in a lot of ancient religions, polytheistic religions, not in Judaism, which was monotheistic, but in a lot of ancient religions that there is a belief kind of in a one God over everything. But that's not monotheism because this one God intermediates with all sorts of other gods and spirits and demons and stuff like that, who are all worshipped as well. And people didn't see any contradiction in that. And the Arabian peoples were similar. They believed that there was this one God, Allah, and there were all sorts of spirits and other gods that they worshipped. There were some exceptions. That we know of. Ms. Crumpton. Hello, Ms. Crumpton. There were some exceptions that we know of. People that were called Hanif or Hanifs. This group of people who are mentioned, we basically only know them from the Quran, the sacred writing of Islam, these people who are called Hanifs, who seem to have been monotheist groups that were living on the Arabian Peninsula, so they weren't worshiping these other gods. And these Hanif groups claimed to go back to this person, Abraham, who was the Jewish patriarch. Remember Abraham? Called Ibrahim in the Quran. All right, and so we have a mentioning of this. This is short, so I'll read it. In the Quran, chapter 3, okay, Abraham was not a Jew or yet a Christian. So he was neither a Christian or a Jew, but he was a Hanifan, and he was an upright man who had surrendered Musliman, and he was not of the idolaters. Okay? So this man, Abraham, is not even identified with Judaism for Muhammad. He was identified as simply being an upright, a Hanif, one of those who worship the one God, but also he's also a Muslim. He was a Muslim. He had surrendered to this one God. He did not worship idols. Well, you get kind of a different story when you read the book of Genesis and the Bible, because, anyways, certainly Jacob worshipped idols. His grandson. I don't know if it says, I forget if it says Abram actually worshipped idols, but anyways. Nevertheless, no, he was not an idol worshiper according to the Quran. So there were these groups there, but there were also Christians and Jews in Saudi Arabia, in the Arabian Peninsula. I go back to our map. We know that there were Jews living in this city of Medina up here, okay, north of Mecca. There were Christian groups in Ethiopia across the way, in various places of the north of Arabia. There were Christian groups. So Jews and Christians were in the area. Possibly Muhammad knew them. There seems to be evidence that he did know them. Well, he did know them, I should say. He does know them. He did know them. But knew their teachings as well, knew what they believed. At around the age of 25, Muhammad became a leader of caravans. All right, caravans. A caravan is, a group of animals with goods on them. And, you have a whole line of them and you lead them along the trade route, for protection. You want to stay in a group. You don't want to be alone, because if you're attacked, there's strength in numbers. So it's called a caravan, all right? So he becomes a leader of this caravan for a businesswoman who becomes his wife named Khadija, which is kind of interesting from what you might assume about the male-dominated culture at the time, that she was the head of this caravan business. So apparently she had some money. So Muhammad marries her, Khadija, and has 2, maybe 3 sons, I guess all of which died in infancy. And he has 4 daughters with her, so a bunch of children with her. And he is a kind of a thoughtful man. He felt the need to search for the truth about God for whatever reason, but he did. And he was restless, and he would go out into the desert around the city of Mecca, apparently also to this mountain, Mount Hira, which is outside the city of Mecca, presumably to this day, because mountains usually don't move. Unless God wants them to, right, Miss Fafana? Then they go. Anyways, and he would go up and he would wander in these mountains, and he would spend time in prayer and searching for God. And at one point, and he had some experiences. Oh, why do I have 610 here? Oh, okay, that's right. He had some spiritual, supernatural experiences, but one especially struck him. He had this one experience of what he later described was an angel or a messenger from God appearing to him in a cave in this mountain of Mount Hira. He was in a cave to just think, pray, whatever. And this angel, it's called the angel Gabriel. If you know the story of the birth of Jesus, then you know this angel's name, Gabriel, because he appears in the story of the birth of Jesus. So this, God bless you. Gabriel, I think, is also mentioned in the Jewish scriptures. I'm just trying to remember where. Or is it Michael? Is it just... No, Gabriel, I think, is mentioned as well. But anyways, certainly from the Christian story. So, that's taken over. This angel Gabriel, or Jibreel, as he's called. And he accosts Muhammad, he I don't know if he physically grabs him, but he, kind of shakes, in a manner of speaking, Muhammad and tells him to recite. And Muhammad's like, recite what? What am I supposed to do? Recite God's revelation. And then apparently a portion of the Quran appears before him, of God's revelation appears before him, and then so that he can recite it. So this is the appearance of the beginning of the revelation to end of the revelation of the sacred writing, what will eventually become written down, the sacred writing, the Quran, and it's called the Night of Power, Laylat al-Qadr. Laylat al-Qadr in Arabic. Laylat al-Qadr. Laylat or Layla means night in Arabic, and Qadr means power. So the Night of Power, Laylat al-Qadr, which scholars believe occurred sometime around 610 AD. 610 AD, the Night of Power. And it's recounted in, there it is, Jibril up there. But if you want to read what he was recited, you go to chapter 96 in the Quran, which has been written down. It was eventually written down. This first revelation is chapter 96. It's not the first chapter. It's all the way in the back of the Quran. So chapter 96. Which I think I might have on the next slide. Let me see. Yeah, I do. Okay. Which I'll come to that in a second. Oh, no, actually, I won't come to that in a second because it's appropriate. Would anyone like to read this from the Quran, Surah or chapter 96? Let's see. I got you, Mr. Whitehawk. Let's see. You're fine. Let's see. I'm going to get somebody else. I'm trying to help your class participation grade. Ms. Crumpton, go ahead. He knew not. Okay, Quran 96, verses 1 through 5, also known as the clot or the clot of blood. Okay, a lot of these surahs or chapters in the Quran are given names, different names according to kind of like the topic or the theme of the chapter, which doesn't always work. Sometimes it's kind of hard to kind of peg the name with the theme, but sometimes it's very clear. But since this mentions a clinging substance or a clot, it's called the clot of blood. Okay, so what did it say? Iqra in Arabic, recite. Iqra. And we know that it's a Semitic language with root syllables, root consonants, right? That have meaning, from which you construct the words. Yes? You listen to Hebrew too, yes? All right? No? You with me, Ms. Boritz? Or have I lost you? Kind of lost me. So we see the root consonants here, Q and R, yes? Q and R. Iqra, to recite. So when we get to the sacred writing called the Quran, Q-R, you add an N onto it, you get Quran, you get recitation. The recitation, taken from this initial revelation. He's told to recite what he sees. In the name of God, the Creator, who created human beings from an alakin. It's sometimes it's translated a clot of blood, whatever that means, but the Arabic word is very kind of unclear. So it's translated in this translation as a clinging substance of what? I don't know. I wasn't there, so I don't know what the Lord did. Maybe made the DNA in a laboratory, and that's alakin. Anyways, but I don't know. And Muslim scholars debate what it could be. But anyways, recite again. Your Lord is generous. Okay, because he's giving you this recitation. God teaches by the pen, so it's a writing. It's going to be written down, or it is written down. Actually, it already is written down in heaven with God, but it will also be written down later. And God teaches people, men and women, what they did not know before. So it's a revelation. It's uncovering. God is showing him things that Muhammad did not know before. So Muhammad starts going into ecstasies and receiving visions of these verses of what? Okay, from God, apparently written by God that he's supposed to recite. Muhammad thought that he was going crazy. Muhammad thought that he was insane. And also, people who knew him thought he was possessed by a spirit, a jinn, as they call them. jinns, little desert spirits related to our word genie. Genie in a bottle. And so Muhammad went to his wife. He went to Khadija and told her of the problem, and asked for her advice. What should he do? And being a wise woman, she advised him to test the truth of what he experienced. You know, if it's from God, then we have to respect it. If it's not from God, well, then we'll jump off that bridge when we come to it. So she brought Muhammad to an ascetic, you could call him a monk or a hermit, who was living out in the desert. Okay, there were these people living out in the desert like hermits, praying to God, seeking God. So you could say they're kind of like monks, but since they're living alone, they're usually termed hermits. And this dude was a Christian. He was a Christian hermit. So Khadija brings him to a Christian who I think was a relative of hers, and brings Muhammad to him. And Muhammad tells this Christian hermit his story and what's going on. And he's the one who kind of says, yeah, if it's from God, it needs to be respected. But if it's not, then whatever. But just basically go with it, see where it goes. If you really think that this is something from God. And so Muhammad goes back to Mecca and begins preaching this message that he believes he's been given from God. This basic message was the oneness of God, that taking this idea of Allah, the one supreme God, which was already somewhat present amongst the peoples of Arabia, but saying, no, the other idols are nothing. You need to reject them and get rid of them. He rejected the polytheism of the tribes. And you must submit to the will of this one God, Allah. And a few people started, heard his message and liked it and started to follow him. But in general, there was opposition to his preaching, as you could imagine, because, it threatened the Kaaba. The Kaaba was good business. Businessmen would come in, they could worship their gods at the Kaaba. So there were business interests at heart. In politics, it threatened kind of the status of the society. The tribes that were worshiping all these gods. Now we have to get rid of all our gods and stuff, like worship this god's god from this tribe. Ooh, tribalism was a big thing because it mattered which group you were from. So why am I going to follow the god of this guy's group? Why is my god or gods not good enough? So there was opposition to Muhammad's message because it threatened the status quo. And at first, they kind of ghettoized Muhammad and his followers as, for protection, again, safety in numbers. So Muhammad and his followers lived in a certain section of Mecca where they could practice their beliefs. And he was kind of protected because Khadija had some power, because she was apparently a rather successful businesswoman in the community, so no one was going to move against her necessarily. But also his uncle had some power in the community. But they both die before Muhammad. Khadija dies, and then his uncle dies. So now Muhammad is unprotected. Okay? So as you can imagine, Ms. Coyle, the knives come out. His enemies have bided their time, and now they're going to make their move against Muhammad. So he knows that, basically he has to run for his life. He has to get out. He has to go. He and his followers are in danger. And so there's the second major event after 610 with the Night of Power, this other event called the Al-Hijra, or as it's come into English, the Hijra, Al-Hijra, which simply means emigration. Sometimes it's translated as flight, fleeing away, but it's more like an emigration, a movement from one place to another. So the movement out, the emigration, you could also say the exodus from Judaism, kind of like the same idea, which is, there you go, the name for the migration of Muhammad and his followers out of Mecca to another city called Medina. Medina. Hoping I got a map for Medina. No. All right, so I'll come back to that. So this occurs around 622, and this marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar. Okay? We've talked about calendars before when we talked about Anno Domini, yes, the Christian calendar, which is dated from what, Ms. Callahan? How is the Christian calendar dated? From what? BC and AD. Why is it dated that way? How is the Christian calendar dated? From what event? Is who? The birth of Jesus of Nazareth. Good. And I think I told you the Jewish calendar, if you went to a synagogue, it's currently the year, I don't know, 5,700 something. But Ms. Butenreither, why would it be the year 5,700 anything in a Jewish synagogue? How are the Jews dating their calendar? What event? You don't know. Is that because you sit here in the corner when maybe you could be sitting up front next to Ms. Winko? You too, Ms. Carney. I'll have to. I don't know. Does anybody know? Anyone remember? Remember what I said? How do the Jews date their calendar? From what event? What happened 5,700 some years ago? Planet Earth. Tell me something. Guess. It doesn't hurt your class participation grade if you're wrong. Take a guess. What do you want to help me out on this one? When Earth was created? Creation of Earth. The creation of everything, yeah. Creation of the world happened 5,007. Now we get to the Islamic calendar. The Hindu calendar, you have to check. I don't think they do have a calendar for celebrating things, but I think they just use the regular Western calendar. I don't know. I'd have to check. I'd have to ask. But for Islam's calendar, this year is, what is it, 1300 something? Miss Fofana, do you? Huh? 1446. It's the year 1446. So 1,446 years since the Al-Hijra in 622. So that marks the beginning of the Muslim calendar. Interesting, because I would have thought the Night of Power would have, once the Quran started to be revealed, but apparently not. Islamists sees this as the major event, the Hijra, this emigration from the city of Mecca to Medina, which was originally called Yathrib. That's its original name, Yathrib. Medina actually isn't a name so much as a title. Once Muhammad and his followers get there and they settle in Yathrib, they become so powerful it starts to be called the city of the prophet, Madinat al-Nabi. Madina means simply city. So Madinat al-Nabi, excuse me. The city of the prophet. Oh, okay, you said 1446, right? Yeah, so I got it. Anno Hajire. So you'll commonly see this written as 1440, now it's 46, AH. In Latin, in the year of the Hijra, Anno Hajire, just like Anno Domini, but from an Islamic perspective. Okay? La da da da. Don't worry about Abyssinia. I guess I won't mention that. Anyways, so Muhammad and his followers emigrate there, and they were actually invited. The people of Yathrib were kind of a divided city. It was a mixed city. There were Jewish tribes in the city. There were Arab tribes in the city. Pagans, of course, not Muslims. And they wanted to bring some kind of unity, and they heard the message of Muhammad and thought he would be a peace builder and a unifier. So they said, hey, come up to our city and live with us. So he did, because he had to get out of Mecca before he was killed. And so that's where it's seen the Muslim community really comes together and starts to form and become organized around Muhammad as its religious and political leader. It's in Yathrib or Medina, where the main ritual forms of Islam start to come into focus. The prayer life, having regular prayer life every day, the belief in giving alms to the poor, giving money to the poor, fasting during Ramadan, which Ramadan does honor the time when God started to give the Quran to Muhammad. So the month-long fast, making pilgrimage to Mecca when possible, going back to Mecca to worship, and other sorts of laws and stuff. So it's the formation of the community, the ummah as it's called, the ummah, community, ummah from Arabic, the community, the group of those who have submitted to God and accepted Muhammad as the prophet of God. Okay? There's your definition. So we have prayer, almsgiving, Ramadan, pilgrimage, and then various laws, hadith. We'll get into the hadith later, which are kind of like halakha for Judaism, the laws, and then also the mitzvot, the commands. But they're based on they're based on the example of Muhammad, testimonies about how Muhammad lived Islam. Okay, Muhammad becomes the example. You want to follow Islam and interpret Islam in exactly the same way as Muhammad understood it. So you get these traditions. I think that's actually what the word is, basically tradition. Okay, hadith. Those also developed during the time of the Hijra. But there are some issues. There are some problems when Muhammad is in Medina. And we see some of those issues recorded in the Islamic sacred writing, the Quran, chapter 2. For example, the Jews. There were, Jewish tribes living in the city. They did not accept Muhammad as a new prophet. Muhammad was kind of proclaiming himself. And as we get more, and when I talk about the revelation of the Quran, well, I guess I'll get more deeply into this. But if you read the Quran, as I said, a lot of the characters from Christianity and Judaism come up. We saw Abraham is mentioned, Jesus is mentioned, Mary, the mother of Jesus, is mentioned, Moses is mentioned, John the Baptist is mentioned, etc., and so forth. And Muhammad really saw these as prophetic figures, and their message always kind of got lost in the shuffle or misinterpreted. But with Muhammad as the seal of the prophets, he's communicating the message exactly as God or Allah wanted it communicated. And people are understanding it as it should be understood. So he's this kind of like the perfect message. He's the perfect prophet, you might say, the perfection of prophecy or prophethood. And while Muslims would honor Jesus or Moses as former prophets, they don't see them as they don't have the authority of Muhammad. Well, of course, this kind of rubbed the Jews the wrong way, because for them, Moses is also a prophet, the great lawgiver. But we know from Judaism, he plays a big role in the history of the religion. And studying and following the law of Moses or his laws in the Pentateuch and the Torah is a big deal for Jews. So they're not going to give that away and just say, okay, now we'll follow this guy Muhammad, whom we've never heard of before, So there was tension with the Jews. Some of the Jews in Medina refused to accept Muhammad as a prophet or a leader. They began to make fun of his revelations and even actively oppose him politically. And so that leads to some tension. And we can see what appears that Muhammad becomes increasingly bitter because he thought the Jews and the Christians should just accept him as this new and final prophet. Okay, and that they would accept it, but they didn't. And so some did, a few did, but most did not. And so there was kind of this bitterness and tension with the Jewish tribes in the city. Some of them he expelled from the city, kicked them out. Others he killed. So there was some violence going on. And you see this tension, as I said, in the Quran, in chapter 2, because originally, we see this in the Quran, God revealed to Muhammad that prayer should be directed towards the city of Jerusalem. It was more Jerusalem that was the holy city than Mecca in the beginning. Jerusalem was the city of King David, also a prophet, and the Jews, their temple. Okay, so in the very early years of Islam, Muhammad apparently and his followers were praying in the direction of the temple in Jerusalem. But then God tells Muhammad to stop. Don't pray there anymore. Now you pray towards the Kaaba in Mecca, your hometown. You don't pray. And scholars think that this is possibly due, or seems to be due, from that tension with the Jewish tribes in Medina that would not accept him. So he's like, okay, forget about you. We'll pray towards my hometown, not towards your major city anymore. Okay. All right, once Muhammad and his followers gained some strength in Medina, Muhammad always had his sights back on Mecca, his hometown. He wanted to go home, apparently, because he and his followers would start attacking the caravans that were coming out of Mecca. They knew, if I want to take Mecca, I'm going to have to starve them for money and for their goods. So the best way to starve Mecca economically was to oppose tariffs. What was it? He's trying to keep it real. Thank you, Mr. Princio. Yeah. Got a few people listening to me. Even my guardian angels stopped listening to me. He's not even taking notes anymore, Miss Francis. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So starve them for money, hit them where it hurts in their economy. So Muhammad and his followers start attacking these caravans and raiding them and taking the goods. This happens around 630 AD. Oh, excuse me, not 630 AD. He starts attacking them and taking their goods. And then in 630 AD, he feels that he's strong enough to actually march on the city of Mecca itself. And so he does. In 630 AD, Muhammad and his followers attack the city of Mecca, and they take it pretty easily. There's not a lot of resistance. And, and Muhammad rides in triumphantly. Here's a picture from a history of Muhammad. Here he is with, these are angels, the wings and the ground. It's supposed to be angels and his followers. And here's Muhammad riding on a horse. Notice that Muhammad does not have a face, because typically Muhammad is not supposed to be depicted, because he's such a sacred figure. It's considered an offense to try to depict his face. But that's not always been, because when we saw, another page from this book. Yeah. Actually, no, that's wrong. That's a bad example. Well, anyways, another page from this book, you had Kaaba praying with no face. I have another picture of him with a face. Some Muslims didn't, it's debatable whether not depicting Muhammad was a hard and fast rule, because some Muslims do depict him with a face. You'll see that in a later slide. I have a picture of Muhammad from a Muslim. I don't want to scandalize or harm anybody. But if it is offensive, let me know and I won't show it. I'll take it off. But there he is, riding in on a horse to Mecca. He goes to the Kaaba. He gets all the idols from the Kaaba and destroys them. And he declares Mecca that it is a city dedicated only to the worship of Allah. But he's a smart man. He's a savvy fighter, because, if he were a Christian, he would just go in and massacre everybody, right? Turn the other cheek and love your enemies and do good to those who harm you, right? Where's that from, Ms. Rayner? Where do we read that from? Turning the other cheek and doing good to those who harm you. Where do we read that from recently? I got you. Let's see. Huh? Good. So we're getting closer, warmer. Christianity. Who said it? Who said those words? Zoller? Who said those words? You don't know from Christianity? Mr. Prinzio, help me out. No, you don't know who said those words either? You don't think so? Christianity, you're on the right track. Ms. Carney. Matthew in the Bible. Who's Matthew? Okay. It is in Matthew, but not really in that form. Ms. Crumpton? Jesus said it, yes. Where did we read Jesus' statement from? Sermon on the Mount. Okay, good, I'll accept that. But whose version of it? Huh? Oh, now I threw a curveball, right? Whose version? There are two versions.
The Gospel of Matthew.
Nope, I'll give you that one. It's not Matthew. So you got three more. It's a shorter version preserved in this other gospel. Matthew is chapters 5 through 7 of his gospel. This one's in part of chapter 6. It's on the PowerPoint if you printed out the PowerPoint. Mr. Prinzio. Luke. Thank you, Mr. Prinzio. The Gospel of Luke, technically called the Sermon on the Plain, but I'll accept Sermon on the Mount. That's fine. Yeah, so, whenever Christians seem to invade a city, they massacre all their enemies. But not Muhammad. Muhammad pronounces amnesty on his enemies. Okay? Anyone who fought against him, as long as they become believers. Okay? Become believers of Allah, and you're fine. Otherwise, you got to go. If you want to keep worshiping your false gods, you have to leave. But I won't kill anybody. I'm not going to kill all the people who opposed me. That's so. He's a wise man and a good decision because, he gains a lot of converts and there isn't, a bloodbath. Okay? Things can now return to normal except that the religion has changed. So that's another major event. In 632... Muhammad dies, he becomes sick, and he knows he's going to probably die. So he gives what's called his farewell sermon. So you have a definition there. So that's the next famous event as Muhammad is dying. He gives like his last testament. What's all this noise? Oh, that's you, Miss Hedgepath. Okay. God bless you, Miss Hedgepath. Are you getting ready to go? I don't. Sorry, Miss Hedgepath. Focus, Dr. Dunn. Leave people alone. The farewell sermon, which is the name for his final discourse in which Muhammad reminds his followers of certain points of his preaching. Okay, it's his final sermon to his followers. He confirms the Quran as the basis for Islamic life. Look to the book. And Mr. Belfield, just the poetry flows sometimes. I have no control over it. It just happens. So look to the Quran as the basis for Islamic life. Yes, that's the general view. Scholars also, some Islamic scholars also kind of debate, and I guess this is a debate going on between different groups of Muslims like the Shiites and Sunnis, because he also seems to say not just, I don't think this is in the sermon, but it might be in some of the hadith, the traditions, not just look to the Quran, but also look to my family as well, which establishes his tribe as also kind of like the locus of authority, not just the only place, not just the Quran, but also his tribe that he belonged to. I think it's the Quraysh tribe, if I remember correctly. As his should be in leadership positions. And he dies. I have a quote here from, this is from Sahih Muslim, book 7, which we'll learn about later. It's a collection of traditions by Muhammad. And I'll read this. But just kind of, giving you, Muhammad asked, this is from the farewell sermon? No, this is not from the farewell sermon. This is just referencing the same idea. And you would be asked about me on the day of resurrection, the final day. Okay, what would you say? It is about, when people ask you about me, they say, we will bear witness that you've conveyed the message, discharged the ministry of prophethood, and given wise counsel. Okay? And so Muhammad raised his forefinger towards the sky, pointing it at the people, and said, "Oh Allah, be a witness to what you're saying it 3 times." Though he says it only twice here when he said it 3 times. Okay, so that Muhammad, it's Muhammad, the message, the prophet, okay, and then his counsel, which I guess you could say was meant to mean the hadith, but anyways, the message and his prophethood are essential to his followers. The message contained in the Quran. Now, Muhammad, as I said, dies. This is the problem. Because it's the big problem, because it still exists today within Islam. Muhammad, out of all the revelations Muhammad received and all the traditions we have about him, apparently he never clearly said what they should do after he was gone. Okay? Some Muslims would say, well, he gave us the book, right? The Quran. So that's just it. That's what we follow. But it's not as simple as that, okay? Because you have also traditions and stuff like that. And his family is involved, his tribe. He seems to say, follow also my family, my house. So, now there's a leadership vacuum. Should there be a successor in Muhammad's position, or is he it? If he's the seal of the prophets, his prophecy now ended with him, and that's it, Or does he need a successor? Well, it's never answered. He never addresses it. Apparently, some Muslims say he does, or did, okay, and told the community exactly who it should be. But a lot of Muslims don't agree with that view. And so it's still an unresolved question within Islam. Who, if anybody, should have followed him as the leader of the Ummah? Who, if anybody? And that still hasn't been resolved. So we move on to, we'll get to that eventually. Now, do I get to it right now? Or do I? Oh, I do. Okay, I do. So, sorry about that. So almost as soon as Muhammad dies, this is a question in the community of, well, do we choose somebody? Okay, yeah, they kind of decide, I guess, that they will choose somebody to succeed as the leader of the Ummah, not as a prophet like Muhammad, but, someone who could unite the community and I guess maybe interpret Islam for later generations anyways. But, there's no obvious successor and no exact provision for a successor to lead the community. So almost immediately we have a war. We have a civil war within Islam, almost as soon as Muhammad dies. What's called the Hurub al-Rida, or the Ridda Wars. The Ridda Wars. Does that matter? Retrace one's steps. Now, I looked up what the Arabic word means, but it's not really that meaningful, I guess. At least not for me. So I'm not going to worry about it. Many desert tribes throughout the Arabian Peninsula that had united themselves with Muhammad and his new religion broke off that allegiance after his death because he was dead. They didn't think they were bound any vows or promises they made while Muhammad was alive. They didn't feel they were bound to them anymore. So they stopped following Allah and they just went back to their tribal ways, their whatever gods or spirits they were worshiping before. And they wouldn't acknowledge the Islamic leadership in Medina. That was in Medina. So you also had to pay a tax. So there's economic things going on here as well, not just religious things. You would pay a tax to support the whole community. And this just wasn't a money grab. I mean, money would be used to help the poor and the needy and stuff, but also, to support the community. Well, these tribes didn't have to feel like they had to pay that anymore because Muhammad's gone. So they left Islam, and in the thinking of the Muslim community, they were now apostates. You know, you could, once you knew the truth about Allah and his prophet Muhammad, there was no going back. And some groups, some of the tribes started to be like, well, wait a second, we have our own prophets. Muhammad. You know, so you had people in some tribes who started claiming that they were receiving revelations from God. They were getting their own little Qurans, their own little revelations, in which they were saying were just as good as the Quran that Muhammad had and the Muslims had. You know, it's kind of a pride thing, you know. Again, the tribal mentality, you know, it's like they want to build up their tribes as well. Why is the Qurayshi tribe the tribe we should be allied with, or we should give all our power to, you know, that they get the prophet, but we don't, you know? So we'll get our own prophets. We'll worship the gods of our tribe. We don't need their gods. So the Muslims started military campaigns to forcibly bring back these tribes into Islam. So it's really the first event in Muslim history after Muhammad, the War of Apostasy, the Ridda Wars, to get these tribes back. The second issue is the Caliph, the idea of a successor. And this is more within, whereas the first issue is kind of outside of Islam. These groups are leaving, and they want to bring them back in. But then this is kind of intra. This is within the Muslim community. Muhammad never clearly named a successor. Okay? As I said, he said, follow the book of Allah that he had given the community. During his ministry, his preaching, Muhammad had apparently mentioned several times that there were two treasures of the Ummah, two weighty things, literally, but they're translated as the word treasure. So there were two special things for the community. The first special thing was the Quran, the written writing, the scripture, but also, as I said, his family, the people of my house. Okay. So where do we look for a successor? I guess we look to the people of his house. Muhammad, as was, you know, culturally acceptable at the time, had many wives. He wasn't a one-woman guy. After Khadijah, he had other wives, other women he was married to. But no male child had survived. Almost sounds like Henry VIII all over again, doesn't it? We're going to have a problem. No male had survived. And of course, the females couldn't be in charge. Right, Ms. Winko? You can't have women in charge. I'm not saying that thing. I'm recording this. I'm not saying that truly. That's the attitude. Of course, no one thought that a female could be the next successor, but you needed someone of the male line. Well, unfortunately, Muhammad didn't have that. So there were two possibilities. There was one group of Muslims that said, well, we choose the best man for the job, the person who was most able, someone who was favored by Muhammad during Muhammad's life. Okay, someone who's a faithful Muslim and Muhammad favored. There was another group that said, Remember what Muhammad said, the second treasure are the people of his house. So it must be of his house, a blood relative. So we have to choose from amongst Muhammad's blood relatives. And that, in fact, was the normal procedure in Arabian culture at the time. We know from the cultures back during the time of Muhammad and when these people were living, that was perfectly logical. That's how you did things. You followed the line of blood, so that was normal procedure. Yes, here we go, Caliph. The nearest blood relative was a man named Ali ibn Abi Talib. So why is he number 4? We'll get to that. But anyway, this man Ali was the nearest blood relative of Muhammad. He was a cousin of Muhammad. He was his cousin, so there was that relationship, that blood relationship. There was also a relationship, in case it matters, of marriage, because Ali had married one of Muhammad's daughters, so he was also a son-in-law, not just a cousin. But this dude, who also later became a successor, a Khalifa, this dude, Omar, convinces the community to support this guy, Abu Bakr. Says, no, we need the best man for the job. And he convinces the Ummah to select Abu Bakr, who was close to Muhammad and did have Muhammad's favor, but he was not a blood relative. Now, this causes another civil war, but within the community that exists to this day, because those who supported the claims of Ali and the traditional way of doing things, which was one of Muhammad's blood relatives, to this day do not accept this decision. And they're called the Shiites, Shia Islam. They've never accepted this decision. Ali not only should have been Caliph, or the successor, Khalifa, but he's the only Caliph, according to them. These other three are nothing. They don't even accept these three because they were elected or selected illegitimately. Ali had the legitimate claim only. Okay? So we have the successors of Muhammad, or called the Caliphs, or Khalifa, successor in Arabic. The other group of Muslims, the majority Muslims, are called Sunni. We'll get to these distinctions later, but Sunni Muslims, they accept all of these for, okay, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and eventually Ali. And they call them the four rightly guided caliphs, or Ar-Rashidun, the Ar-Rashidun, which means rightly guided, yes. Four successors, the four first successors of Muhammad, the four first caliphs are rightly guided, Rashidun. So Sunnis accept all of these, Shiites do not. Only Ali. So that's going to become a problem. Well, that still is a problem. So who are these caliphs? Because they're important to the history of Islam. The rest of after the caliphs, the rest of the history of Islam, I'll leave to the textbook, just so you know. I'll ask, a few questions about the history of Islam. I'll leave that to the text, just like I did with Christianity. Okay, so be aware of that and make sure that you read or have read the chapter on Islam in the textbook, because there'll be several questions from it that I might not cover in class. They'll be in the textbook. So the first guy, Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr is selected. He was the first adult male convert to Islam. So apparently the first adult male. I guess Muhammad had converted, younger people or children to Islam, but he was the first adult man to become a Muslim. And he was a close friend of Muhammad. He was, in fact, related to Muhammad through marriage. Muhammad had married, I guess, one of his daughters, because he was Muhammad's father-in-law, yeah. So he married one of Abu Bakr's daughters. Say your father-in-laws are related through marriage, not just by blood. Were they blood? No, they weren't blood related. Anyways, he's often called Siddiq, Abu Bakr Siddiq, which means trustworthy in Arabic. It's his nickname. It also can mean the truthful one, the one who tells the truth, because he was known for his faithfulness to Muhammad, so he's a trustable guy. Yes. And he was the one who oversaw the military campaigns during the Ridda Wars to bring back the wayward or rebellious tribes. But again, like Muhammad, he was a smart military leader. He was treated respectfully, the conquered tribes, in order to induce them to re-accept Islam, and which they did, and they became, active supporters of the religion. So he didn't just obliterate them, okay? Again, as Christians would do with heretics. Burn them all! Get the stakes out! Burn them! By stakes, I don't mean like New York Strip, Mr. Whitehawk. I'm talking about, like some kind of witch. Huh? Yeah. But no, Abu Bakr is a good guy. He said, no, I'm not going to kill you all. Just, come back to Islam and we'll be fine, which they do. And he started overseeing the integration of Islam into Arabic culture, the Arabian culture, stuff like that, which you can't, you can't, it's so obvious in Islam, Arabic, the language of Arabic, the cultural style, you just will go to a mosque, removing your shoes and stuff like that, and how you dress, how people dress, see Ms. Hedgepeth, all sorts of things, cultural things. But that's for any religion, Hinduism is India, right? So the temples are, built like an Indian, constructed in Indian style. I drive past one on my way home. There's this huge Indian temple in New Jersey. And it doesn't look Western at all. It looks like a traditional, like you're in India. Christianity has a lot of influences of Greece and Rome and the Mediterranean world. So you see that in the customs. And so it's no different with Islam. And that, kind of happens with Abu Bakr. All right, so Abu Bakr dies in 634. So he's only alive for a couple years after Muhammad. And he's buried next to Muhammad. This is the burial site in Medina, not in Mecca, but Medina. And you have the tombs. I believe this is Muhammad's tomb. And then Abu Bakr, number 2. And you have Umar, the next dude. Okay, so you got these little holes in the doors of the tomb where you can bend over and whisper, Why do I show up this for? Why do I get in my car? You can, whisper, peace, God's peace and blessings be upon you, Muhammad. God's peace and blessings be upon you, Abu Bakr. So you can whisper through these little holes in the door. So that's the burial place of Muhammad and at least 2 of the early caliphs. The next caliph after Abu Bakr was this guy Umar ibn al-Khattab. At first, Umar was an opponent of Muhammad, but then came to believe in Islam. Kind of like St. Paul in Christianity, St. Paul of Tarsus. Umar. He's nicknamed Farouk, the distinguisher, meaning he can distinguish between truth and lies. Farouk. And he's the one who believes, or he's the one seen as the founder and creator of the Islamic Empire that emerges. Okay? Muhammad, remember the statement about Ezra, Ms. Coyle, that we read from in Judaism? The statement that, God would have revealed the Torah to Ezra had Moses not come first. Everyone remember that? Ezra, the father of Judaism. Ezra. Muhammad says a similar statement about this man, Umar, that God would have made Umar the prophet had Muhammad not been born before him and received the revelation first. But that shows you how highly Muhammad thought of this man, Umar, that he was good enough to have received the prophecy over Muhammad if Muhammad hadn't beat him to it. Forceful man, energetic, a great organizer. As I said, the main architect of the Islamic Empire, which emerged rather quickly after the death of Muhammad. Yeah, I'll get to that map. I have a map there in a second. We'll see. And under him, he sent out raiders to raid non-Muslims, attack them, and push the boundaries and the influence of the, Islamic movement farther and farther throughout the Arabian Peninsula and north, even up to where the Christians were in the Byzantine Empire. Remember, we talked about the Byzantine Empire with Constantine in the eastern half of the Roman Empire. So they started encountering these Muslim armies, which eventually would spell the death of the Eastern Roman Empire. So within 12 years of Muhammad's death under Umar, the Muslims exerted control all the way from where they were in the Arabian Peninsula as far as Libya and Persia. Now I guess it's appropriate to show this map. So, Arabia where it started, they conquered all of that, and then pushed out here. So this is modern day Libya, modern day Iran. Okay, here's the borders of the Byzantine Empire. So, and this all used to be like Byzantine Empire. They took all of this, the Middle East, and then later pushed out even up into northern France. That's northern France, southern France. Okay, within a very quick period of time. You see that when we had 750. So within, died what, 632? So over almost 150 years later, they conquered all that territory. But it began with this guy Umar. Umar established. Oh, wait, hold on a second. What do I want to say here? Yeah, Umar established a welfare system. He kind of established the system of the Ummah, the system of the empire to manage this empire. So he had a welfare system for taking care of people. He established the calendar based on the Hijra that comes from Umar, that will date it from the time of Muhammad's emigration to Medina. He starts, now that they've expanded up into regions where they're mostly Christian. Okay, these places they went, mostly Jews here, but all of this is Christian territory. All of this mixed in with pagans, non-Christians followed, but mostly Christian. So now what do you do with these people who are not followers of Islam? Well, you try to convert them, to change them. And so there was some doing of that, sometimes in good ways, sometimes in not so good ways. But if you did not want to convert, then you had to pay a tax to the Muslim rulers. You were considered protected, but there are all sorts of, discriminatory rules now. You couldn't, a Jew or a Christian couldn't sit on a horse because you couldn't be higher than a Muslim in any way, shape, or form. So you couldn't sit on a horse. So what if you're standing? You're not on a horse. Well, then you always had to bow your head down so you'd be lower than the Muslim in the room. You couldn't build a synagogue or a Jewish house higher than any mosque in the town. So all the synagogues and churches had to be at a lower level than the highest mosque in the town. So all sorts of little rules and things that Jews and Christians, if they did not want to convert, had to do, as well as paying money for the benefit of the protection of the empire, the Islamic empire over them. So Umar established stability to this region under Islam. He was more feared than loved, however, and Sunnis love him. Sunnis love Umar. Shiites hate him for what he did by blocking Ali's claim to the caliphate. And they'll never forgive him for that because he opposed Ali and said, no, we should select Abu Bakr. After Umar, we have this guy, Uthman ibn Affan. Uthman ibn Affan. He was an early convert to Muhammad's message, and he married two of Muhammad's daughters. So there was that relationship of marriage. And he continued the conquests, moving, gaining more territory for the Islamic Empire. But he was old. And I'm not an ageist, so I'm not saying because he's old there's a problem. But, he was old. And, every time of your life, your age has its good points, but has its bad points, When you're young, your body can do a lot of things. Your body is resilient, okay? When you're in your 20s, your body heals faster and stuff like that. But you're also dumb. You do dumb things, as evidenced by spring break. Just go to any spring break and you can watch all these 20-year-olds doing dumb things. Not that they're bad people, but, maybe that's not a good idea. After you've had 6 beers to go try to go bungee jumping in the middle of the night, without any straps. Oh, it'll work. I'll use some rubber bands or something. They're tight. They're really thick ones. It'll work. And when you're old, your body is not resilient and your brain does not always work as well. So you can be dumb too, for different reasons. Not maybe think properly. And so, he was an older gentleman who maybe had some issues because of that, who couldn't really cope with the pressures of the empire that he had to manage. And so he farmed out a lot of the job to his family members, his Nepo babies, which did not make people like him very much because he put all his sons and stuff in positions of power, and whether the sons could do the job or not, And both Ali, our friend Ali, who would become the fourth caliph, we've heard of him, was not happy with Uthman and condemned him. But even one of Muhammad's wives, Aisha, and I didn't write her name down. Well, she's down here, okay, so I don't need to write it. But also up here, she didn't like Uthman either. She, in fact, was known as Muhammad's favorite wife, Aisha. Married her when she was very young, and he loved her very much. But she hated Uthman too and condemned Uthman. She wasn't, Uthman was not following God or the will of the Prophet. Not the thing you want to hear if you're a Muslim. Because if you're not following the will of God, if you're an opponent of God, an opponent of his prophet, does that mean that you're an apostate, that you're out of the community and you've got to be gotten rid of? Some people thought so. The last straw, I think, for a lot of people, for Uthman, and why he's really very important to the history of Islam, is that he's the one who oversaw the production of the official copy of the Quran. And I say that official deliberately, because there are other versions of the Quran that were floating around. But he recognized that. Because, originally the Quran was recited. Okay, you had a guy singing the Quran when you came into class. Okay, and that's really the traditional way to read the Quran. You just don't read it, but it's supposed to be sung and recited as well, outwardly. Okay, that's the ideal way to do it. And so, you have people who do that. And in early Islam, you have people who by memory could recite the Quran. All right, they would recite the words and sing the words. It wasn't written down yet, not in its full form. The problem with that was that the reciters didn't always agree on the recitation, on what they remembered the Quran said. Now that's a problem, because from the idea was that it's the perfect book. In fact, it's literally written by God. We'll learn this later. So God wrote one thing at one time and one thing at another time. We have two, or maybe a third thing at a third time. No, God should be consistent. So that troubled some Muslims, certainly troubled Uthman. So his solution was, okay, well, we'll take a text, the text I accept, we'll write that down, and any other copies are burned. Anything else that's been written down is to be destroyed. And the reciters are supposed to shut up and get in line. or else. So there's kind of this purge. So this was a dangerous act, okay, because while it had been written down, this act led to his assassination. People saw this as an offense. You're burning the word of God. And who is Uthman to determine what is the true Quran? What was the true revelation that Muhammad received? Because you had these different traditions, and it wasn't like Christianity where you have 4 gospels about Jesus, 4 different stories about Jesus, and the Christians were like, okay, we'll deal with it. No, Uthman didn't want to deal with it. So this led to him being killed. He was assassinated. You have the siege of Uthman, okay, where a group of people come and they fight against Uthman, they kill him. So at this point, now the Ummah, there is no united Ummah anymore. The unity of the Ummah is at an end. And from this point on, all you have is one basically long civil war between those who supported these first three caliphs and then those who will support this next guy that we're going to talk about. I have a minute, just let me 1 second on him. Ali ibn Abi Talib. Finally, you would think this is a unifying moment because, okay, Ali is finally accepted. So now you can reconcile with the significant minority group that thought that he should have always been the Khalifa. He should have always been the successor because he was Muhammad's nearest living male relative. And he was also married to one of Muhammad's kids, one of his daughters. And Muhammad did think highly of Ali. Ali was one of only 10 people that Muhammad promised a place in paradise. Said, yes, you will be in paradise. No question. So he did have a high opinion of, so he should have been a unifier. Should have those who thought the best man for the job and those, he's a relative, he's a blood relative. But it was not. He was not a unifier. In fact, there will be another civil war, an actual civil war, not just an assassination. He will be assassinated as well. But after there is a civil war where there's a revolt against him. Even by one of Muhammad's wives. This is where, again, Aisha comes into play. She revolts against Ali, who's the caliph of her husband. Anyways. All right, but we'll come to that next week. God bless you all. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Have a good day, miss. Thanks. Good day. Yes. All righty.